Julia. It's great to see you.
Hello. Thank you for having me today.
Of course, and welcome to everyone who is on Facebook Live right now and on our website watching us. We're so glad that that everyone is joining us tonight for this really wonderful discussion and really, I think, a needed discussion right now. So I appreciate you being here with us. Before we start, I would like for us all just kind of open our hearts up to the Holy Spirit and ask God to speak to our hearts. If we could just pause for a moment. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, amen. Good and gracious God, we thank you for allowing Julia to be with us this evening. We ask that you bless her presentation and that we find her words fruitful and that we are present for one another and help one another through this difficult time. And we ask this through Christ our Lord. Amen. So before we start with your presentation, Julia, I'd just like to introduce you to everybody.
Sounds good.
Julia is a counselor in Chicago and the owner of Vita Optimum Counseling and Consulting, LLC. She also leads workshops and writes on topics related to self-care, relationships, and mental health. Her book, It's Okay to Start With You, is all about the power of embracing your authentic self through self-care. And she's passionate about learning, about empowering individuals to be their most authentic self. Oh, I love that. You can find more of her writing online at juliamariehogan.com. And I've been on there many times and I would highly recommend it to people. It's a wonderful resource, lots of good things on there. So we're going to kind of open this up now to Julia. She's going to present. And then everybody else, if you have questions, we're going to kind of save those to the end. I'm going to pop off. It's all going to be about you. And then I'll come back to you. All right.
Sounds good. Thank you,
All
Sue.
right.
I appreciate it.
You bet.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for being with me here tonight. I know that we are all zoomed out, and so I am very grateful that you're here with me and choosing to spend your Sunday evening learning more about authentic self-care from a Catholic perspective. And like Sue mentioned, I'm a Catholic therapist. I work just outside of Chicago at my private practice. And then I also do a lot of writing on the side, and I'm really passionate about integrating the Catholic faith with the science of psychology in my work and as a therapist, and then also in my writing as well. So I'm hoping to weave that into our presentation today as well. And so what we're going to do, I just want to give you the opportunity to get a little bit of an outline so you know where we're going today. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the stresses that we are dealing with right now that are really unique to the time that we're living in with the pandemic and just all of the changes that it's brought. So we're going to set the stage and talk about why do we need to talk about authentic self-care? Why is this so needed right now, and how can our faith inform that? So we'll talk about stress, where it comes from, some signs to look out for, and then we'll move more into the answer or the solution to that problem of stress. And that's going to be obviously authentic self-care. But I'm going to explain how it's a little bit different than probably what you might have heard of or encountered in popular culture. Self-care is often talked about more as a surface level solution, but we're going to go a little bit deeper tonight. And then we're going to look at examples of self-care and talk about how our faith specifically informs this view of self-care. And then, as Sue mentioned, we're going to leave time for questions at the end. So my goal is to get through everything and leave about 10 minutes at the end with questions. And so if you have questions, please comment below the live stream with your questions, and Sue will be collecting them and we'll ask them at the end. So we'll definitely leave time for questions as well. So let's dive in and let's talk about some of the stressors that are unique to the time period that we're living in right now. So it's no secret that this has been a tough year on many different levels. I think that this has been something that none of us would have anticipated encountering in our time, no matter whether you're school aged or you're out in the working world, or you're working, you're a stay-at-home mom, or you're retired. Any of those things, it's been a huge adjustment, a really big change, lots of stressful things going on. And I think that there are, I would say, probably 4 to 5 particular reasons why things are uniquely stressful right now. So the first one is the economic insecurity a lot of us are facing. Our income sources maybe have changed, or they aren't as dependable. And that can cause a lot of stress. Worrying about money is one of the top 5 stressors for most people in most age groups, actually. And so anything that has to do with money or uncertainty around money can be very stressful for all of us. So that's definitely happening right now. And that goes hand in hand with job insecurity as well. So a lot of individuals I know have either lost their jobs completely, or their hours have been cut, or it's just not as certain because so much work is dependent on that in-person connection. So, as we know, things like restaurants, so I know that anyone who is a waiter or a waitress or a host or a hostess, a chef, any of those things, your hours may have been cut, or you may have lost your job entirely. And that again is a huge stressor. Our jobs are so important to us, not only as part of our identity, but also for supporting our families and ourselves. So that has been something that's been uncertain as well during this time. I think in addition, just the uncertainty and the fear surrounding the pandemic and the virus. And it's so great and hopeful that we have the vaccine. It's becoming more and more available, but there's still a long road ahead of us. And so confronting the fears about, do I go outside? Do I see this person? What's the best way to stay safe and handle my safety and the safety of my family? And I know that Sue shared with me all the wonderful things that you're doing at your parish just to make sure that everybody's still able to watch Mass, have a beautiful live stream experience, and still be able to participate in your faith, which I think is really beautiful. So along with the pandemic changes, I know that we've just had a lot of big world events going on. We had the election, which I know is very stressful for many of us for a variety of reasons. We had a lot of issues around racial injustice that have been coming up even more so recently. And all of these things, even if you feel as if they're not directly affecting you in your day-to-day life, they still affect us because we are a community. So we're being hit on all these sides with all of these different stressors. And I think combined with that, we're experiencing something that's called decision fatigue. And that is a term that's used to describe the mental exhaustion and physical exhaustion that comes with having to make decisions over and over and over again. Because as human beings, our bodies and our brains appreciate patterns. We like things to be the same because then we know how to respond to them. We know what to expect. And so our brains get really good at recognizing patterns, coding those in. And so the next time we encounter a similar event, we just activate that same pattern and we're good to go. We don't have to agonize about what the best decision is that we need to make because we've already encountered it before. But in a time like this, we are constantly faced with new decisions and we're having to reevaluate based on new information that we've gotten. Things are constantly changing. Excuse me, I'll give you a really simple example. But I know that right in the beginning of the pandemic, so this is almost a year ago, in March, I remember I sent out an email to all of my therapy clients and I said, I will be going into the office and I will still be meeting with clients in person, but I'm happy to offer you the option for telehealth. So I used all the information that I had at the time, and that was the decision that I made. And then probably not even maybe 3 to 4 days later, our state went into lockdown, a shelter at home, stay at home order. And so I had to send out another email saying to my clients, we're going to be moving strictly to telehealth right now. And so we did that. But that's just a little example, a short example of decision fatigue in the sense that constantly having to reevaluate decisions, make new decisions, look at the same circumstance and have to turn it around and treat it from a different way based on new information. Whew, that gets exhausting, right? And we're having to do that every single day with these changes. If you have school-aged children, perhaps it's deciding whether or not to send them to school or keep them at home to do school virtually. It's deciding which grocery store do I go to, how long do I stay, how often do I go. How am I going to handle the holidays? How am I going to handle family time, friend time, all of those things? It starts to weigh on you and it gets exhausting. And then that problem is compounded because the things that we used to count on and take for granted is just natural stress relievers. So for example, if when you're stressed, you're used to calling up a friend and meeting them to go for a walk around the block and talk through what's going on, or perhaps it's going out to dinner or going to a gym to work out. A lot of those things haven't been available to us in the exact same way. And so not only are we experiencing all these different stressors, economic, financial, our daily lives have just been shifted in the way that we spend our time, live streaming church instead of going in person, for example. The stress of the pandemic just in general, all of the world events that have been happening, this decision fatigue. And then on top of that, we don't even have our usual go-to stress relievers and that sort of thing to depend on. So we feel even more stressed because we're not able to address it in ways that we're used to. And we're having to learn to be creative. And that's what we're going to be talking about a lot today in the second half of my presentation, is really looking at how can we be creative and find different ways for dealing with stress if our go-tos are still not available to us. So what I want to do is I want to share my screen. I have a list here of common stressors. So let me pull that up. Signs of stress, I should say. And let's see. Oops, I think I'm missing it here. Let me pull that up. I had it open, but we'll pull it up again here. Let's see. Okay, so here we go. Let me just hit view as soon as it loads. And we can look at right here. Okay. All right, so signs of stress. So we just laid out some common sources of stress, but now I want to take a moment to just address some of the common signs of stress that many people experience. So as I'm talking through this list, I want you to be thinking about, are any of these things popping up in my life on a pretty consistent basis? And if so, this might be your body telling you that you are feeling the effects of stress. So one very, very common one is always related to sleep. And this is a question I ask my clients in the very first session, just to gauge how they're being affected by whatever stress they're experiencing in their life. Any trouble falling asleep or staying asleep. So if you're someone who consistently is just, it's bedtime, you want to go to sleep, you know that you need to go to sleep, but you just can't shut your brain off because you're on that hamster wheel, I call it, of worry, just worrying and worrying and worrying about things. That could be a sign of stress. And then also, in addition, you might be someone who you fall asleep, but then you keep finding yourself waking up at night worrying. So those can be two signs of stress that we experience. Muscle tension is another really, really common one. So a lot of people will get jaw tension. So you might be someone who clenches your jaw when you're stressed. And so you might start to feel some soreness there. A lot of people will experience neck and shoulder pain. That's also a sign of stress. Digestive issues are another one. So if you find that you frequently have maybe an upset stomach or other digestive problems, that could also be related to something like stress. A weakened immune system, your body is dealing with stress, and so it has a harder time fighting off some of the, or keeping your immune system strong. Another sign is difficulty concentrating during the day, and that's usually because your mind is racing and you're thinking about all these other things. Again, that decision fatigue comes in, right? Where you might be thinking, okay, what should I do next? Or what's the best thing to do here? How do I respond to this situation? What do I do with this new news that I got? So your mind is racing. It's hard to focus on the task at hand. So that's whether you're a student, you might find it hard to pay attention at school. If you are working from home, it might be hard to pay attention to a meeting, or if you're paying the bills or something, focusing on that. And then also any other task that you might be doing at the time. If you have trouble focusing, that might be a sign that stress is getting in the way of your ability to function on a daily basis. Increased irritability is another one. So if you just feel like, you are on edge all the time, and the slightest thing you just get really irritated and act out, and that's not like you, that could also be a sign of stress. Headaches, tension headaches, again, from stress. Forgetfulness, because you have so much on your mind and you're thinking of so much, you've got that huge mental load. It's easy to forget things. And then isolating yourself. So especially if you're someone who's pretty social, if you find yourself withdrawing, not really wanting to be around people, that could also be a sign of stress. Now, all of these things can also have different origins, we could say, right? For example, if you've had too much caffeine, it might be hard to fall asleep at night, right? So there can be other reasons for these things. Digestive issues, for example, if you have a food allergy, that could also be an explanation for that. If you went to the gym and you worked out muscle groups you haven't used in ages, or if you're like me and you went out to shovel the snow earlier this week and you definitely felt it in your back, their muscle tension can be due to another reason. So the key here is to look at this in more of a global sense and say, do these things start to turn up when I started to really feel the stress of what's going on in my life? And do I have several of these together that can kind of create this story that stress is affecting me? So why do we feel all these things when we're stressed? Why does stress affect us in this way? Why can't we just label it as stress and move on and be fine? There's actually a biological reason for this, which I think it's really, really neat to know about. And I think also important because it really, I think, gives you a deeper understanding of what's going on and what to look out for. And so what it's called is your stress cycle, right? It's the cycle your body goes through when it encounters something that's stressful. Now, the key thing here to know is that for your body and your brain, its job is to keep you alive, right? Survival is really important here. And so it doesn't really differentiate your body and your brain. They don't really differentiate between, I would say, like a physical danger, for example, like I don't know, like a bear jumping out at you or something. If you're hiking in the woods, it doesn't know the difference between something like that and maybe an email that you open that's stressful, or something you see on the news that's stressful. All that your brain knows is that it's gotten a signal that you're in danger, that something doesn't make you feel comfortable or something doesn't feel right. And so then your brain activates what's called your sympathetic nervous system. So you can see there on your left side of the screen, I have a couple bullet points there to describe your sympathetic nervous system. It is what happens when your body recognizes danger. Like I said, whether that's the bear jumping out at you in the woods, or the email or unpleasant news that you receive or see on TV, that's your body's danger signal, and it activates your fight, flight, or freeze response. So those are three different ways that people often respond to danger in a situation. And that's your sympathetic nervous system is very similar to the gas pedal on the car, right? So think about, you're driving along, you encounter danger and you want to get away from it, you're going to hit the gas pedal, right? So that's your brain does the same thing by activating your sympathetic nervous system. So what happens when your sympathetic nervous system is activated? Well, things happen like increased muscle tension, your digestion slows, your heart rate increases, your breathing usually increases, so you start breathing more quickly. The idea is to get more oxygen into your brain. Sometimes you might feel like you get tunnel vision because you're focusing on things, and you feel like poised, right? Ready to respond at any moment's notice. And all of those things happening in your body are designed to help you either fight the danger, run away from it, or freeze and watch carefully until the danger is past, right? So all of these things happening in your body and in brain are meant to keep you safe. So they're good things to have. It's good to have a stress response. It's unhealthy and probably very harmful to not have one. The key or the issue is when you are going through many stressful things at once or over an extended period of time, and then your body really doesn't have a chance to recover from that stress. And so then you feel like you're always stuck in this state of heightened alertness. You always feel on edge. You always feel like you're looking out for something or waiting for something to pop around the corner. And that it gets exhausting. And then that's where all of those symptoms of stress that I mentioned on the earlier slide here, that's when those things start to pop up and stick around. Because ideally, when you go through a stressful situation, you experience that fight, flight, or freeze response. And then once the danger has passed, you move into the parasympathetic nervous system response. And that's on the right side of your screen there. That's when your body gets the sign that it's safe, right? That means that your body can move more into a rest and digest mode, which is your heart rate decreases, your blood pressure goes down, your breathing slows, your digestion starts up again, your muscles relax. It's like pressing the brake pedal on the car. And so your brain is then calming everything down. But when we're under a lot of stress, or when we're under stress for a consistent and extended period of time, we don't get to that parasympathetic nervous system activation as often as we should. And so we feel like we're stuck in that fight, flight, or freeze for a long period of time. And so that's when you start to get things like chronic muscle tension, or chronic digestive issues, or chronic jaw pain, all of those sorts of things. So we don't want that to happen, right? We want to what's called complete the stress cycle, which is when you notice that you're stressed and your sympathetic nervous system is activated, you want to make sure that once that danger is passed, that you activate your parasympathetic and you signal to your body that it's safe. You signal to your brain that the danger is gone and you can feel calm again. A really simple example of that would be, for example, if you're crossing the street, let's say, and you look both ways and you start to step in the street, and then you see a car coming and your body senses that danger, you move back, right? That's your moving away from the danger. The car passes, and then you take a deep breath, right? And you're like, whew, that was a close call. That's you going from your sympathetic nervous system response, let's get you out of that danger. So you had to move away quickly, so your muscle tension increased, you're breathing probably more quickly, you can probably feel your heart beating really fast. And then once you recognize the danger is gone, you're taking that deep breath to activate your parasympathetic nervous system and let your body and brain know, whew, danger is gone, we're okay. So that's your science lesson for today, but I want you to keep this cycle in mind as we're talking about self-care, because all of the things we're going to be talking about are going to fall into this parasympathetic nervous system activation side of things, because these are the things you're going to want to turn to when you realize that you're under some stress, or the stress is affecting you and you want to take care of it. So we're going to be giving you some good strategies here for activating your parasympathetic nervous system. So we've talked a lot about the problem, and now I want to talk about the solution. That's the more hopeful and empowering part, right? So let's move into how can we take care of stress? How can we address it? How can we manage it? How can we make sure it doesn't stick to us and build and build and build to really get to a point where we're way overstressed, right? The answer is going to be self-care, right? No surprise there, I'm sure. But this is how I define self-care. So self-care is any practice that promotes your overall well-being. And then I break it down into 4 to 5 categories. So your physical well-being, your mental well-being, your emotional well-being, your relational well-being, and your spiritual well-being. So it can be any practice that helps promote these different areas of health for us. And that definition is purposely broad because self-care is going to, or I should say, effective and authentic self-care is going to look different for each person. So what is self-care for me is going to be different than what self-care is for Sue or for any of you here tonight in participating in this presentation. So I want you to be thinking about, as we're going through these different categories, what you feel like you are needing right now with the particular stressors that you're experiencing. You might be under a lot of pressure at work and you have a lot to do. And so maybe when we talk a little bit about boundaries, that might be something that would fall into effective and authentic self-care for you. Whereas maybe for someone else, sleep is really important. And so physical self-care is going to be really important for them from an effective and authentic standpoint. And so, yes, this definition is purposely broad and we'll dive deeper into each of these areas, but it's broad because it's unique to each person, like I said. And so it's not a one-size-fits-all approach. It's not about being perfect. It's more about figuring out what's best for you based on your particular needs. And so I want to take a moment to talk about how this definition of self-care differs than something that you might have encountered in the media, I would say. Because self-care is often, I often see it equated with things like skincare. So if you are buying the latest cool skincare product, then you are practicing self-care and you're taking care of yourself, right? Or if you are adopting more of a treat yourself mentality, you're told is self-care. And those things can be self-care. Those are not bad things to be doing. But I'm arguing here that authentic self-care goes way deeper than that, way deeper than skincare, way deeper than going and getting a manicure or a pedicure or just binge watching your favorite show on TV. I would argue it's actually a discipline that you're looking at. What do I need? What's best for me right now? What's best for me and my family? What can we be doing to take care of ourselves? And this taking care of ourselves matters from our Catholic worldview. And that's what I want to talk about next, is looking at how does our faith inform this different definition of self-care, this authentic self-care. So I have 3 points here that I think build a good foundation for this type of self-care. So the first one is that you are created and loved by God. Or another way of saying that is that God loved you into existence. And I know that we teach this to our kids, right? We hear it all the time and we think, yes, I know God loves me. He loves me unconditionally, of course, but it is actually very important, I think, to recognize and try to grasp the depth of that and the amazingness of it, because I think if you think about that, we often, I think, put ourselves last, right? We say, oh, other people need me more. And so I don't get enough sleep because I have so many things to do, or I have so much to do at work. And so I cut out the things that really help me flourish or help me feel fully like myself, or fill up my cup. You've probably heard that phrase before. You can't pour from an empty cup, right? But we tend to skimp on those things that help us keep our cup full. So we skimp out on sleep, or we don't eat properly, or maybe we're not really great about the people we let into our lives. Maybe we just have unhealthy friendships or something like that. Maybe we let our spiritual life go. Maybe we're not managing any kind of anxiety or worry or stress that we have in our lives because we have other things to do. So we neglect ourselves and we let that go. But I would argue that when you take a step back and you think about God created you and loved you and specifically thought of each one of you, right? You weren't just this random assembly of cells. As Catholics and as Christians, we believe that God created each one of us intentionally, that he gave us, he put us at a specific moment in time with a specific group of family and friends. He gave us talents and characteristics that only we have in this combination. And he gave those to us so we can do good in the world and we can bring God's love to others in our circle of influence. But he created us to do good. And so I think that recognizing, God loves me, I need to take care of myself, right? I'm not just this thing to be used and discarded at the end of my life, but that I really need to be taking care of myself so that, and this moves into the second point, so that I can live out the specific call that I have, that I've been given, that God has given to me. And so if I'm not taking care of myself, then I'm not able to fully be present in the way that God has called me to be in my vocation. So if you're too tired, it's really hard to focus at work, right? If that's part of where you're called to do good in the world, or it's hard to be kind to your family or to your friends or to your significant other if you're tired or stressed, right? And so addressing these things and taking care of yourself helps you to be that fuller, more authentic version of yourself, and therefore to do good in the world as well. And then finally, taking a different spin, I would say, on this gospel passage where Jesus says, love your neighbor as yourself, right? And I know for me, I tend to focus on the love your neighbor part. And I think, okay, yes, that's my call to serve others, to be as selfless as I possibly can, to really focus on doing good for others. But we forget that second part, right? What does it mean to love your neighbor as yourself? What does that mean? And I think for me, it means that we're putting ourselves and our neighbor on level playing field, right? We're recognizing that we all have equal dignity and we all are loved by God. We all have worth, inherent worth, because we're loved by God. And so we have to take care of ourselves and take care of others, right? If we're not taking care of ourselves, how can we take care of other people as well? So we could definitely spend, I think, all evening diving into the spiritual aspects of self-care and the spiritual foundation of it. There's passages in the gospel where Jesus goes away to pray, right? Or he just goes to spend time with his disciples. He's not always relentlessly in his ministry. And if you think about it, he only had 3 years, right? He had 3 years to send his message, to let us know the good news, right? and that he was there to save us. He only had 3 years, and yet he took time to spend with family and friends, going to dinner at Martha and Mary's house, for example, or going off into the boat with the disciples, or even going into the desert to pray, to be by himself. So he wasn't always going, and skimping on sleep and skimping on meals and not taking time to restore or invest in prayer. So we have lots of examples of Jesus practicing self-care as well. So I think this gives us at least a foundation to work with for why self-care is important as Christians, I would say, especially as Christians and Catholics. And if you're interested in this particular aspect of self-care, or maybe you have some questions about it, maybe self-care sounds selfish or something like that, I cover a lot of those misconceptions or questions in my book. So it's called It's Okay to Start With You, and it's published by Our Sunday Visitor. And I have a section in there where I go through some common misconceptions about self-care, and some common, I don't know what you would call them, like excuses or roadblocks to practicing self-care. So there's more that we could say, but I think in the interest of time, we'll keep moving here. So let's dive into those. There are 5 different categories of self-care, but I bring emotional and mental self-care together in one category for the presentation today. But let's talk a little bit about physical self-care. So again, this is going to be anything related to taking care of your body. We are body and soul, so we don't want to neglect our bodies. So eating healthy and nutritious foods obviously is important. Exercising, sleep, and body image. Those are the 4 areas that I think of when I think of physical self-care. So nutrition is important, obviously, but also from the context of if I'm nourishing my body, then I have the energy I need to do what I'm called to do in my life. And I have another, just a very, it's just, I guess, a silly or simple example from my own practice as a therapist, but I often, especially in the beginning when I was first starting out as a therapist, I wanted to see as many clients as I possibly could. And so I was always tempted to just schedule a client through my lunch hour, and I would convince myself, it'll be fine. You can eat in a quick 5-minute break. No big deal. You're going to be great. But often what would happen is I would run out of time. They wouldn't have time to eat. And then I would be seeing a client during my lunch hour. And do you think I was present and aware with my client as much as I would have liked to have been? No, because my stomach was rumbling and I was kicking myself because I didn't take time to eat. And I was thinking, you can't do this. You need to make sure that you're taking time for lunch, and how much longer do I have for lunch? And that's not what I wanted to do as a therapist. I wanted to be present with my client. I wanted to be able to fully enter into what they were saying and not be thinking about my lunch in the fridge. So a simple act of self-care was telling myself that I needed to make my lunch hour a priority, because then I was going to be a better therapist to my clients. So it was a tough decision, because I had kind of told myself that, if you see another client, that's better than eating. And then I had to learn the hard way that no, actually eating is better to be a better therapist to my clients. So self-care can be as simple as making sure you're eating lunch. Or things like exercise and stress, exercise and sleep are especially important for addressing stress, because we know that exercise, we hear, is important. It's important to move our bodies, but it is a very powerful stress reliever, actually. Even something as simple as going around, taking a walk around the block or in your neighborhood, it starts to activate your endorphins, and it actually boosts creativity. And it helps reduce that stress response in your body. So back to that stress cycle, right? That can be a powerful way of closing that stress cycle loop. And exercise as well can lower symptoms of anxiety and depression, along with other treatment as well. But exercise can be really powerful there, as well as sleep. Sleep is a stress reliever, and it can also reduce any anxiety or depression that you might be experiencing as well. And then body image, I put that on there because I think it's important to acknowledge that God created us body and soul. And so we need to appreciate the amazing things our body can do for us, that it helps us live out that good and that purpose that God has given to us. So self-care in a very brief nutshell, for sure. Mental and emotional self-care. So stress management is important, which is what we're talking about today. Another, I think, simple self-care strategy, it can be hard to do in the moment, but a simple one is positive versus negative self-talk. So we're often very critical of ourselves. We have that inner critic that's always pointing out what we've done wrong, what we could have done better. We're only noticing the negative things in our day. And so I would encourage you, if you feel like that's something that happens a lot, to shift to more of a positive and empowering mindset. Because when we only see what's going on, we only see the negative things, that starts to just wear away and eat away at us. And we miss out on all the blessings and the positive things that we experience in our lives. And I would argue we still have positive things happening, even in the midst of stress and suffering in our lives, even in this stressful time like this. And so along with positive self-talk, you could do practice like keeping a gratitude journal. They've done studies that show that just simply keeping a gratitude journal for 30 days can boost your sense of well-being and your happiness. So that could be just sitting down and writing 3 things you're grateful for each day. And you're training your brain then to recognize the positive things, because it's so easy to just narrow your focus and only see what's negative or only see what's going wrong. But even in the toughest of situations, there's something positive. And so widening that viewpoint to incorporate the positive can be really powerful. And something like a gratitude journal can actually help you start doing that and build a habit of noticing the good things. Leisure is also really important, especially in times like this where we feel like there's so much to do and work is so busy or school is so busy. Taking time to just rest and do something that you enjoy can be very restorative and can help close that stress cycle as well. And let's see, there's a couple other ones on here. I'll go through them quickly. We'll make it work. The comparison trap, you definitely want to avoid that. And I think that social media can be a place where that can be really active. And the comparison trap is basically looking at the lives of others and comparing ourselves to theirs. And usually we find that we measure up or we don't measure up, right? We come up short because someone else has a more fabulous life, or they have a more supportive, I don't know, family or a better job or something, we tell ourselves, right? But you forget that social media only tells you part of the story, and it's meant to be a place where you're sharing mostly good things that have happened to you. So we don't get the full story, but it's easy to trick ourselves into this, scarcity mindset. I don't have enough, or I have only negative things happening to me. And again, gets you stuck in that trap of negative self-talk. So comparison trap can be pretty sneaky and can chip away at our mental and emotional well-being. Noticing your emotions is really important, especially when you want to manage stress. Asking yourself, how am I feeling right now? Am I feeling tense? Am I feeling stressed? Am I feeling happy? Am I feeling at peace? Am I feeling content? Being able to identify your emotions can help you zero in on what you need to address or how you're doing. It's kind of like a temperature check, right? A little bit for your emotions and your mental health. And then practicing mindfulness can also be really important. That could be something like prayer, could be something like deep breathing. Deep breathing is really powerful because it does activate that parasympathetic nervous system and tell your brain that you're safe and you're calm. So that's really easy and simple strategy as well. So I think, my point in mentioning a lot of these is that they're simple to do. They don't require special equipment. They don't require you going off to a mountain retreat for a month to be away from the world to build these skills these are things that you can be incorporating into your life right now, actually, right after this presentation. It was really easy to start that gratitude list, right? Let's move on then to relational self-care. So you can see I've written boundaries 3 times here on the slide, and boundaries are very, very important. And particularly when it comes to self-care, because boundaries allow you to devote your time and energy to the things that you say yes to, and to keep the things that you say no to or are not beneficial for you out, right? That's what boundaries do, is they kind of let in what you would like to let in, and they keep out what you don't want in your life. And boundaries can extend to people, but they can also extend to things like time, how you spend your time, how much time you take on things or things like that, but particularly with relationships. And we need relationships right now. They're so important for managing stress. And so we want to make sure that we have healthy relationships in our lives, right? So spending time with people who energize you and lift you up, not spending as much time, or not spending time with people who drag you down, or don't respect you and your time, and your emotions and things like that. Guarding your days off is really important. Making time for leisure, being honest about your limitations, asking for help when you need help, not being afraid to say no. Think back to my example about wanting to schedule a client during lunch hours. A healthy boundary for myself was saying, no, I cannot see a client during this time. I'll schedule them for a different time, because I know that I need to make sure that I'm making a time boundary around lunch and not being afraid to say no, so that I can say yes to the clients I've already scheduled on my calendar, and say yes to being a better therapist as well. Boundaries is a huge, huge topic. There's so much that we could say on this. Again, I could spend probably more than a day talking about this because there's so much there. But if you're interested in this topic, I would recommend the book called Boundaries by Doctors Cloud and Townsend. They're Christian counselors, and they wrote this book all about boundaries from a Christian point of view. And it's really, really good because it talks about boundaries are things that help us have the healthy relationships that God wants us to have. It helps us cultivate those qualities that are part of a God-given relationship. And then if you really want to do a deep dive into boundaries, the same authors also have a series of books. So boundaries with kids, boundaries in dating, boundaries in marriage, boundaries at work. There might be some other ones too. So you can really do a deep dive into boundaries if you're interested in this topic. And then let's finally look at spiritual self-care. So making sure that you are spending time building a relationship with your Creator and constantly staying in communication with God. And that way, where is God calling you next? Where is He calling you to invest your time and energy? Who is He putting in your life that He wants you to help? Or who is He putting in your life to help you so that you are open to receiving that help? That's really important. And you can see, I mentioned prayer when we were talking about mental and emotional self-care. So you can see that these all kind of work together or influence one another, right? That they are part of more of a holistic perspective of well-being. And so investing time in, say, your spiritual self-care is also going to have benefits for physical self-care, mental and emotional, for relational, right? They all kind of help each other out. And sort of like waves, right, in the ocean or in a pond, right? That there's a ripple effect that they influence and benefit those other areas as well. So don't feel overwhelmed by all these different areas or all the things that you could potentially be doing for self-care. What I would encourage you to do is think about what is one of these areas that really is causing me a lot of stress. And then what's one simple self-care strategy that I can do to help address that? And that could be something as simple as going to bed 10 minutes earlier each night until you get to your ideal bedtime. It could be avoiding screen time before you go to bed and picking up a book. It could be setting a timer and doing some deep breathing, and praying the rosary. And, spending 10 minutes doing that. It could be calling a friend when you're stressed instead of isolating yourself. So there's lots of different things that you could be doing, but I would encourage you to think about what do you need the most and what's one simple thing that you can do to start addressing that and start building some self-care habits. And then as you feel like you've gotten that one, that particular strategy built up and you have a good cadence going with that, you can add something else in as well. And so I would encourage you to start small and keep it simple, because that's where you can build effective self-care strategies. And so again, just to kind of tie this into the content that's included in my book here, I have a self-care assessment. Actually, I have a printout of it rather than pulling it in the book. But a self-care assessment included in the book, where I walk you through different areas of self-care or well-being. So physical self-care, sleep and nutrition, and self-talk and confidence, mood and emotions, leisure, stress, relationship and boundaries. And you can go through and you can circle, agree or disagree with the statement to kind of help you assess what are your areas of strength when it comes to self-care, and then what are the areas that you need to focus on and kind of build up in that. And then in my book, I walk you through the different areas of self-care and how to identify which practices you need in building a self-care plan. But the information that I've included tonight for you is everything that you need to get started with an authentic self-care plan. And I'm just so passionate about it being something that you can do with no special equipment or training required, right? It's listening to yourself, it's identifying those stressors, and then picking something that you know that could actually make a difference, that's achievable for you in your own life, that you can do. So, it's really as simple as that, I would say. And so with that, what I want to do, I know that there's much, much more that I could say, and I could genuinely just keep going on this topic because I feel so strongly and passionately about it. But I think this is a good time to pause. And Sue, if you don't mind seeing if there are any questions that people have, we could leave some time for questions right now on self-care and the Catholic perspective.
Yeah, so we're not having there. I asked, does anyone have any questions for Julia? We didn't have any questions, but I can ask you a question because I have. I do struggle with like what you described was so perfect when you worked through your lunch and like you just thought you were going to keep going and not stop. And I think, to be honest with you, I think I've done that like my whole career, like, so how do you kind of back out of it, once you're like way deep in there, how do you like maybe some suggestions of like, where do you begin?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, I definitely hear what you're saying, where it gets to be the extent where it's almost like your habit, or it's like your MO, right? Where you're like, this is just what I do. I just like work through everything, and I'm like eating a snack while answering emails and notes and things like that. And never getting all your work done and always going home with a to-do list and everything. And I think that it's like, I know that for myself and Sue, maybe you've also felt this way, where sometimes you dream about like, I just need to like start from scratch and like completely, like, I don't know, have some kind of like do-over or something, which isn't always realistic. And so I think though, it's really looking at like, what's one small change that you can make, So for me, I did things like I would open up my calendar on my computer and I would literally go in and I would block out my lunchtime, and I would say like, I would write notes to myself where I would say things like, do not schedule a client during this time, you need to eat lunch. Because in the moment I would be feeling, really like, nah, it'll be fine, I'll schedule a client, it's all good, like I'll make it okay. But then when then in the future, fast forward to that day and I'm so hungry and I'm wondering, why did I do this to myself again, right? So I put reminders in my calendar, or I would say things like, do not schedule, like your future self will not be happy about it, right? And then when I'd open up my calendar and look and see what's available, I'd see that reminder and I'd think, you're right, I got to be honest with myself. I'm not limitless. I don't have endless amounts of energy. I need to eat. I need to make sure I'm taking breaks. So I felt kind of silly doing it, but it was actually really helpful writing notes to myself in my calendar. So I think things like that, where, you say, okay, maybe it's like every day I'm making a promise to myself that I'm going to take a 10-minute walk with a coworker, and we're going to go out and we're going to walk. And even if we're talking business, we're still moving, we're getting outside, fresh air, even in the winter. I think that can be, so it wakes you up, right? If you feel like you're falling asleep, you can hop out in the cold weather. So I think in summary, choosing something really small, right? That it doesn't mean that you have to somehow come up with this really complicated organizational system and planning system and, buy some kind of planner, start a bullet journal, but really just thinking about, okay, maybe I just need to schedule 3 10-minute breaks for me to get up and move away from my desk just to like reset mentally. And then I'm going to come back fresher. And I know that I'll never get all my work done anyway, because there's always more to do,
Right.
especially when you're working for a church. Like there's just always more that you can do. Anytime you're working for something that's so mission oriented, right? The work is never done. So taking care of
Absolutely.
yourself along the way so you can keep going.
I love the idea of like reminding myself, because I have to say, like for prayer, I put in my phone, I put like reminders to like pray, like,
Oh,
whatever, at 11
yeah,
o'clock, it's like pray for my husband. And so I pause right there and I pray for my husband.
I
But
love
like,
that.
but I never even thought to like pause, take care of yourself, you know? Like,
Yes,
oh
yes.
yeah, that's right. I have to do that, like
Even
I
to
love
do
that.
like a little check-in, like you're saying, and just say like, how am I feeling right now? Because you might have a time where you're saying, I'm actually feeling pretty good. I'm feeling energized by this project. I think I can keep going and I can take a break later. Or you might say, oh my gosh, yes, now that I've stopped to assess myself, I realize my shoulders are up here as I'm
Yes.
typing because I'm so stressed, or I'm I don't know, bouncing my leg up and down because I have all this nervous energy or whatever. I think I need to take a break and reset.
I
And
love
then,
that.
but just
I
like,
love that.
yeah, so maybe it's as simple as like you were saying, just setting a reminder for yourself to say, how are you doing right now? Right.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you're getting the remember to pray for your husband, remember to pray for this person. And then also, wait a second, how are you doing right now? How are
Right.
things going for you?
I love that. And then someone asked, what do you recommend we do if we know we work well under pressure or stress and overcommit? Like if they're really good at it, why
Yeah,
shouldn't they just go at
no,
180 for
that's okay.
their life?
The I'll sleep when I'm dead, right? You hear that a lot. It's like, I'll just sleep when I'm dead. No, that's a great question. And thank you for asking that. I do appreciate that. I think that the answer to that is it's self-care doesn't mean that we need to clear our calendars, live life at a snail's pace, say no to everything, and be like contemplative all the time, right? Because I think for some people that seems ideal, right? Some people might be hearing me say that and think like, oh, that sounds wonderful, right? But then there are some people hearing that and probably thinking like, oh my gosh, no, I don't want to be contemplative. I like moving around. I like being active. And I think that goes back to what I talked about on the slide. Let me see if I can get to it. The definition of self-care, that it's unique to each person. And so for one person, if they're under stress, they might think, I'm going to go to the gym or I'm going to go work out because that's a really powerful stress reliever. And I love doing that. For someone else, it might be quietly journaling instead.
Yeah.
So if you're the kind of person who thrives on, you know, time crunches or lots to do or a deadline that you've got, or just like doing a lot of things and going, from, event to a commitment, that's not a bad thing. I think the important thing is to make sure that you're just pausing and assessing, am I making sure that I'm taking care of my basic needs? Am I still getting enough sleep? Am I making sure I'm eating? Am I investing in my relationships? Am I making time for prayer? And you can do all those things in an active way too, right? So it doesn't have to be just slowing down. It doesn't have to only be quiet things or contemplative things. It can really be, again, anything that promotes your well-being. So if you are an active person and you prefer exercising or you prefer going to a social event, that can be totally be self-care, especially if you're more extroverted as a person, right? You want to connect and you get energy from being around other people. So that's totally going to be a form of self-care. But if you're an introverted person, you need that time by yourself to restore. And so you're probably not going to choose, I don't know, like a networking event as your form of self-care. That might be more like an obligation you're going to, right? Whereas you might be super excited about having a night in just to yourself. um, and it has to do too with your season of life, right? Because I know especially if you're a mom with young kids or you just had a baby, you're not going to be getting 7 to 8 hours of uninterrupted sleep, right? That's just not reality. And so you can't beat yourself up for not getting, the ideal amount of sleep, because that's just not the way that things are right now. And so, focusing on a different form of self-care, and that might be not being afraid to ask for help from someone if you're feeling overwhelmed, or,
Oh,
if somebody says, how are you doing? Is there anything I can do? Instead of saying, no, thank you so much, but I'll be fine, to really say, could you run out and get groceries for me? Because I just can't do it. I don't have the time. Right.
yeah.
So yeah, I know that was like a little bit of a tangent from that question, but all around that theme of, it's not bad to be an on-the-go person or an energetic person. That's actually a great thing. We need people who are kind of all different things in life, right? We all have different gifts and talents.
Yeah.
So it's just making sure that you are doing those things, you're not, like my mom would always say, burning the candle at both ends, right? You want to make sure that you're doing those things, that you have the energy, you can fully commit to them, fully say yes to them, and you're not being stretched too thin, right? If you feel like you're being stretched too thin, then it's time to take a step back and reassess, probably, and say, wait a second, maybe I'm saying yes to too many things. Can I be a little bit more focused and intentional about how I spend my time, but still embrace that part of your personality of being a active person, an energetic person, someone who likes to do a lot.
Thanks. Oh, that's good. That's excellent. We have one more question. Yeah, I'd like to know the answer to this. How do you deal with the divisive political climate we are in? This person says, I've given up listening to and reading the news for Lent. And then they say, not sure if that is a responsible thing to do, but it is my major source of stress. So if we have like one thing, that it could be political, maybe some people are still like obsessing about COVID, and the virus,
Sure. Yeah.
like kind of stuck in that, like, but I think she wants to know more from a divisive political climate.
Sure. Yeah. Yes. So that's a great question.
Yeah.
Thank you for asking that. And I think that, for whatever reason, and maybe that would be a discussion that would be too deep to go into right now, but for whatever reason, I think that, we've kind of gotten to this point in our society where we have a hard time having constructive discussions with each other, even if we disagree, right? And so it becomes very like, I'm right, you're wrong. And sometimes we moralize it, right? Where I'm right, and if you don't agree with me, you're an evil person, or, things like that. Yeah. We just get entrenched, and it can just devolve into arguments and name calling and just mean stuff, right? And so I can totally understand giving up the news and Lent and media for Lent, because that's just a good palate cleanser, right? But I think people were talking about this phenomenon called doom scrolling. Have you heard of that?
No.
Which is basically just like you're going through your social media and reading about all the terrible things that happen, but you can't look away because it's like sucked you in. And, social media has kind of that addictive nature to it. So you're just getting overwhelmed by kind of all the awful things happening in the world. And I think we saw that a lot with politics, and still do, right? And just, in conversations with people or on social media. So I think two things come to mind for approaching that. I think the first thing is to recognize that even if the other person isn't extending this to you, that you can always just take this attitude of, we're all allowed to have our own different opinions, right? And so I can give myself like the grace to have a different opinion than someone else. I can have this sort of attitude of peace, right? That even if I don't agree with you, you have a right to your opinion. And we can disagree. We can be on different sides of the political aisle or viewpoint or whatever you want to say. That, we all have we're all allowed and encouraged to have our own perspective, right? So like, I don't have to apologize for how I feel about something, or I don't have to explain it to someone if I don't want to, right? That's
right.
And then an extension of that is, just because someone wants to talk about it with you doesn't mean that you have to, right? And that's where boundaries come in. So a boundary could be like, the example given in the question that was just asked, it can be saying, I'm not going to watch the news, and I'm not going to, be on social media because I know that it's causing unnecessary stress for me, right? Am I getting any kind of benefit? No. Am I changing anybody's mind by having a discussion with them on social media? Probably not. It's just getting me riled up, right? So that's a healthy boundary you can set, right? Or if with your maybe with family and friends, and someone wants to bring up a political topic and you really don't want to discuss it, you can set a boundary and say, I prefer that we talk about something else. I'm not comfortable talking about that right now. So really, I think protecting your time and your energy around those things is absolutely okay to do. And I would argue important to do. And I'll give you an example from my own life. Maybe it's like half political. I feel like sort of the pandemic got political at times. But in my work as a therapist, I worked with my clients the whole time. We mostly talked about the pandemic and what was going on, and still are, because that's important, right? That's what we're going through right now. And so that needs to be a topic of conversation. It's necessary for us to talk about it in these sessions. But that meant for me that when I was done with work, I didn't read anything on the news. I wasn't searching anything that had to do with the pandemic. And then when the election rolled around, I really didn't do any news watching or read any articles unless I was doing my own research. And then I was picking and choosing, where I was getting my information from. But I knew for me, I needed to set that boundary, because if I talked about COVID all day with my clients and then went and turned on the news and read some articles, it would be so stressful and so overwhelming. So I knew I needed to set that boundary for myself. So we can do things like that, where we can say, just because it's there doesn't mean that I need to listen to it, or just because someone wants to talk about it with me doesn't mean that I need to talk about it with them. And then with things like the news and social media, you get to decide who you follow and who you don't follow, right? And so if you see their posts and it starts that stress response or that response in you, you don't have to read what they write. You can mute them. You can temporarily unfollow them, or you can follow them completely unfollow, whatever you want to do, right? But just reminding yourself that you don't have to, if it's not a place for a constructive, respectful conversation, you don't have to spend your time and energy on it, right? Of course, there's a place to have conversations with people who don't share the same viewpoint as us, and I think that can be really valuable. But it has to be based on respect, right? And if the respect isn't there on both sides, then it's not a helpful conversation for anybody to be having. So that's where boundaries can come in. But it's definitely, it's a tough topic for sure, and a really great question. So I hope I gave some ideas. I know I maybe didn't give you a 100% solution type of answer, but some things to get started or to kind of chew on with that.
For me, the answer brought me all the way back to the beginning of your presentation when you talked about discipline. Like, I have the discipline to be able to say, no, thank you.
Yes.
I don't want to engage.
Yes.
I mean, that's what I heard from that whole, and that's something that, again, like when we get sucked in, all of a sudden we're like down that road and we're like, in a battle, and we think, this is not me. This is not who I am.
Right. Who's saying these things?
How did I get here? And so it's kind of that awareness of like a discipline of like being able, and that we have every right to do that, to say
exactly.
No, thank you.
Yeah. And you're just letting the person know what you're okay with and what you're not okay with. You're not saying they're a bad person, or you're not rejecting them, or you're not canceling them. I know that cancel culture is big right now. You're just saying, I prefer not to talk about that. I'm happy to talk about something else with you. But if you continue to talk about it or push the issue, I can't have a conversation with you right now, because that's just not something I'm willing to participate in. And it's perfect. I would say it's perfectly okay to do. I think it's also important to do, because you're in charge of what you're okay with talking about and what you're not, and nobody can force you to, right? Especially with politics, because it is such a touchy subject.
Oh, yeah, but beautiful. That's beautiful. I love that. We have one more question from our website, and it just says, how do I say no to my kids? I don't have any That's all I have.
Other context. It's a good
Ready,
question.
go.
It's a great question. I think that I would recommend, first of all, to whether it's from the library or you order it from your independent bookstore, or get the ebook, the Boundaries with Kids book, because that's going to have, I think, probably the answers that you're looking for and the foundation or the rationale behind that. But I think a short answer to that would be that when you are saying no to your kids, you're not being a bad mom if you're saying no to something that you know would either be harmful for them or not good for them, right? Quick example would be when someone a little toddler is having a tantrum in the grocery store because they want that impulse piece of candy at the cash register, right? Yeah. And it would be so easy to just buy the candy because then your child will not be screaming anymore. And I know that it's really easy to feel like other people are judging you because your child is screaming and having a tantrum and you just want it to stop. Totally get that. It's very stressful. But saying no is letting your toddler know, we're not, I told you we weren't having candy, and just because you're screaming doesn't mean that I'm going to give into it, right? Because then when I buy the candy, yes, you're quiet, but then now you've learned that if you scream long enough and loud enough, I will get that candy bar, right? Yes. I know this is very easy to say sitting here from my chair. I know how hard it is, but thinking about, even if your kids are telling you, oh, you're a mean mom because you won't let me have candy or you won't let me do this or that. If what you're doing is coming from a place of love and genuine concern and care for them, then you are making, yes, a tough decision, but you're setting a healthy boundary for them, right? And providing them too with a safe structure, right? Because children especially, they need to feel secure, and healthy boundaries help them feel secure because they know what to expect and what to expect and what they can do and what they can't do. And that provides a sense of safety for them, which is really important. If they have no structure and they can do whatever they want and there are no consequences, it's actually kind of scary for them because they're testing their limits and they're realizing nobody's giving me limits and I don't know what to do. So I would say definitely check out the Boundaries with Kids book. It's really, really good, the whole series. So hopefully I hope that helps get the process started there.
Yeah. Well, no, I like the no from a place of love. Like, it's, that is why we say no to our kids. I mean, we would love to say yes to everything, because we want to give them the world.
Exactly.
But no from a standpoint of love. That's pretty great. Yeah. That's pretty great. Well, we had a few questions, and there was someone that asked if we could put the links to purchasing, like, your books and things like that. And we'll do that on the website, on our website, and we'll also do it on Facebook after we wrap up tonight. But I think we could just talk all night about this.
I know. Oh yeah, we could keep going. We totally could. So Sue, thank you for your question, and everybody who asked a question, thank you so much for sharing and being brave souls to throw a question out there. I appreciate them all, and I hope I gave you something to think about. And also, thank you so much for your time tonight, because like I said at the beginning, I know that we spend so much of our time on Zoom and video calls and not getting that in-person connection we value so much. So I do appreciate you being here, because I know, honestly, it means all the more that you took your time on a Sunday to be here and talk about authentic self-care. So know that I am grateful for that. I am praying for all of you. Please keep me in your prayers as well. And I think this is probably a good time for us to sign off, right, Sue?
I would agree. I just greatly appreciate your presence here and your
thank you for having me.
Oh, it was wonderful. It really was. And I know we talked about this way back in, I think, September. And I thought, oh, by now the pandemic will be done. Here we are, Here we are. Oh, I just thank you and gained a lot from the presentation.
Oh, so good. I'm glad. It was a true honor to be here, and thank you for having me. And if anybody has any questions, you're welcome to just send on my website. There's a spot for sending questions and things. So you're welcome to reach out to me if you need to. And but otherwise, I hope that you have something useful from this presentation. You can start implementing self-care right now, and using our faith to inform it with all of that. So
thank you, Julia. Thank you for a lovely presentation and a delightful conversation, actually, if I'm being honest.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you so much for having me, and have a good evening, everyone.
Yeah, you too. Thanks so much, everybody.
Bye.
Have a great night. Bye-bye.